The moment my son threw my suitcase onto the front porch, I knew 12 years of silence were about to become the best investment I ever made. I stood there in my good Sunday dress, watching my own flesh and blood lock me out like yesterday's garbage. Little did they know yesterday's garbage was about to become worth $8 million. The rain was starting to fall, those fat October drops that soak through everything they touch. My hands were shaking as I gripped the handle of that worn leather suitcase, the same one I'd packed for my honeymoon 43 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then I was packing for a new beginning. Now I was being packed out of what I thought was my ending. "Mom, we need to talk." James had said that morning, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. At 33, my son had developed the kind of calculated cruelty that cuts clean through bone. Jessica stood behind him like a shadow arms, crossed wearing that smug expression I'd grown to hate over the past 3 months. Her sharp beauty had always reminded me of a blade, pretty, until it drew blood. The granite countertop felt cold under my fingertips as I set down my coffee cup. That countertop I'd helped them afford with my Social Security checks, stretching my widow's pension to cover groceries while they figured out their financial situation. 3 months of playing grandmother cooking meals and pretending not to notice how they whispered about me when they thought I couldn't hear. "What's wrong, honey?" I'd asked, though something in my chest already knew. You develop instincts after 60 years of living a sixth sense for when the ground is about to shift beneath your feet. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," Jessica announced, stepping forward like she owned the conversation, which apparently she did. "You're too set in your ways, Maggie. The children are confused about who's in charge." I looked at James, searching his face for some trace of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The boy I'd raised alone after his father decided that responsibility was too heavy a burden to carry. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't meet his mother's eyes while his wife delivered the execution. "Where am I supposed to go?" The words came out smaller than I intended, like air leaking from a punctured tire. "That's not our problem anymore," Jessica replied with a shrug that would haunt my dreams for months. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out." 20 minutes later, my entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories, photographs and keepsakes reduced to what I could carry. The rest would go to Goodwill. Jessica informed me cheerfully, as if she was doing me a favor by disposing of my existence. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," James mumbled as he set my bags on the porch. For just a split second, I caught a glimpse of something that might have been shame flickering across his face. Then Jessica appeared beside him, and his expression went blank again, like a television switching off. The taxi arrived as the first real drops began to fall. I climbed in without looking back, not because I was strong, but because I was shattered. Through the rear window, I caught Jessica already at what had been my bedroom window, measuring for new curtains with her hands. I had $847 in my purse, my late husband's watch around my wrist, and absolutely nowhere to go. What I didn't have was the slightest clue that this humiliation would become the fuel for the greatest transformation of my life. The driver glanced at me in his rearview mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" I stared out at the suburban street where I'd thought I'd found refuge, watching other families through lit windows, living their normal lives. "Just drive," I whispered. "I'll know when I see it." But the truth was, I had no idea what I was looking for. All I knew was that the woman sitting in that taxi, back seat clutching her purse and trying not to cry, was about to die. What would rise from her ashes was something neither James nor Jessica could ever have imagined. The Sunset Motel on Route 9 became my home for the next 6 weeks, and let me tell you, it was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. $43 a night for a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, but it had a roof and a door that locked. After being thrown away like trash, even that felt like luxury. The elderly desk clerk, Mr. Patterson, took pity on me after the first week. "You're not like our usual guests," he said quietly, sliding an extra towel across the counter. Most of their clientele was either working construction jobs or hiding from something. I was just hiding from the truth that my own son had discarded me. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in that narrow bed, forgetting for just a moment where I was, and then reality would hit like a physical blow. The water-stained ceiling became my companion, those brown rings mapping out my new geography of abandonment. No grandchildren's laughter filtering through thin walls, no family breakfast to prepare just me and the broken air conditioning unit that wheezed like a dying animal. But here's what Jessica and James didn't count on. I'm not the kind of woman who stays down, never have been. When James was young and we had nothing, I'd worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Survival wasn't new to me. I'd just forgotten how good I was at it. The library became my sanctuary. Free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job listings. At 60, nobody was exactly lining up to hire me, but I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for opportunity, and opportunity has a way of hiding in the most unexpected places. "You have experience in bookkeeping?" asked Sarah Mitchell during my 4th interview that week. She owned Mitchell's Garden Center, was about my age, with dirt under her fingernails and a no-nonsense attitude I immediately respected. Her office was cluttered with invoices and plant catalogs, coffee-stained papers scattered across a desk that had seen better decades. 20 years, I replied. I handled all the finances for my late husband's contracting business. What I didn't mention was that I'd already spotted at least 3 ways she was losing money just from sitting in her office for 10 minutes. The inventory system was chaos. She was overpaying suppliers, and her pricing structure hadn't been updated since 2008. "The pay isn't much," Sarah warned her weathered hands sorting through receipts. $15 an hour part-time. "When do I start?" That first paycheck was $240, and I treated it like I'd won the lottery. After 6 weeks of watching my savings drain away like water through a sieve, earning money again felt like breathing after being underwater. The motel room slowly transformed from a temporary stop to something resembling home. I bought a small coffee maker, hung up my few family photos, and even splurged on a plant for the windowsill. 3 months in, I made my first real discovery. Sarah was throwing away thousands of dollars worth of plants each year. Anything that didn't sell by the end of the season went straight to the dumpster. "It's just how the business works," she explained with a resigned shrug, watching me examine a cart full of supposedly dead specimens. But I saw something else entirely. I saw potential sleeping beneath brown leaves and wilted stems. "You want to do what with the dead plants?" Sarah asked, looking at me like I'd suggested we start selling fairy dust and unicorn tears. "They're not dead," I explained patiently, running my fingers along a dormant stem that still had life pulsing through its core. "They're dormant. With a little care, most of them can be revived and resold next season." This was month 8 of my new life. I'd moved from the motel to a tiny studio apartment above Yepes Pizza. The rent was $650 a month, which left me about $50 for everything else after groceries. But it was mine. No one could kick me out on a whim or decide I was too set in my ways. Sarah let me take home 3 truckloads of supposedly dead plants that November, probably figuring it would teach me a lesson about business reality. What it actually taught me was that I had a gift I'd never known existed. My tiny apartment became a greenhouse. Every windowsill, every corner, every available surface was covered with pots and planters. I researched plant care on the library computers, watched YouTube videos until my eyes burned, and spent my evenings nursing brown wilted stems back to life. The neighbors thought I was crazy. Mrs. Chen from downstairs kept muttering in broken English about too many plants whenever she saw me carrying another pot upstairs. But by February, something magical started happening. Green shoots appeared like tiny flags of victory. Buds formed where I'd seen only death. My studio apartment transformed into a jungle of healthy, thriving plants. I had over 200 specimens, and about 150 of them weren't just alive, they were flourishing. "Maggie, what the hell?" Sarah gasped when I brought the first batch back to the garden center in March. These beauties looked better than when they were new. Their leaves glossy and full roots, strong and white. when I gently lifted them from their pots to show her. "Told you they weren't dead," I said, trying to hide my grin. Inside, I was doing cartwheels. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about discovering I had a talent that could actually make money. Sarah bought back every single plant for half the original retail price. In one transaction, I made $847 more than my first month's salary. But more importantly, I'd found something that felt like purpose again. The next year, our arrangement became official. Sarah would set aside all the unsellable plants for me. I'd rehabilitate them through the winter, and we'd split the profits in spring. Word started spreading through the gardening community like wildfire through dry grass. "That lady at Mitchell's can bring anything back to life," people would whisper. Soon other garden centers were calling, asking if I'd take their clearance plants too. By the end of year 2, I was making more from plant rehabilitation than from my bookkeeping job. I'd also moved to a larger apartment with a proper balcony and had turned Yeppe's parking lot into an unofficial greenhouse with his amused permission. Every healthy plant I saved felt like proof that being discarded didn't mean being worthless. Some things just needed the right care, the right attention, and the right person who could see their potential. James and Jessica had thrown me away, assuming I'd wither and disappear. Instead, I was putting down roots in soil they'd never even imagined existed. Year 3 was when I stopped thinking small and started thinking smart. I had a waiting list of garden centers wanting me to rehabilitate their clearance plants, and my apartment operation was bursting at the seams. The landlord had started charging me extra for water drainage, and Yeppe was getting tired of customers asking if they could buy the beautiful plants covering his parking lot. "You need a real facility," Sarah told me during one of our coffee meetings, "and you need to think bigger than just saving plants." She was right. But thinking bigger required money I didn't have. My savings account had grown to about $15,000, which felt like a fortune after starting with nothing. But it wasn't enough for commercial space. That's when I met Eleanor Rodriguez at the Small Business Development Center. Eleanor was one of those sharp, efficient women who could spot potential from a mile away and wasn't afraid to push people toward it. "You're not in the plant rehabilitation business," she told me after reviewing my numbers with the precision of a surgeon examining x-rays. "You're in the business of turning waste into profit. That's a completely different conversation." Eleanor helped me see what I'd been too close to notice. I wasn't just saving plants. I was solving a major industry problem. Garden centers nationwide were literally throwing away millions of dollars in inventory every year because they didn't know how to handle end-of-season clearance effectively. "What if you franchise the process?" Eleanor suggested, her eyes bright with possibility. "Teach other people to do what you do. Take a percentage of their profits and scale the operation nationwide." The idea was terrifying and thrilling all at once. Me, a 63-year-old woman who'd been homeless 3 years earlier, running a national business. But the numbers Eleanor showed me were impossible to ignore. We spent 6 months developing a business plan. I would start with a proper facility in Millbrook, perfect the rehabilitation process, document everything, and then begin licensing the method to other operators across the country. The SBA loan application was 47 pages long, and I nearly gave up 3 times trying to fill it out. But Eleanor pushed me through every section, helping me articulate why this wasn't just some crazy plant lady's hobby. It was a legitimate solution to a real problem. "Mrs. Williams," the loan officer said during my final interview, "your financial projections seem optimistic." "Sir," I replied, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who'd proven people wrong before. 3 years ago, I was living in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Last year, I turned $50,000 worth of dead plants into $200,000 in revenue. I'd say my track record speaks for itself. The $150,000 loan approval came through on a Tuesday in March. I signed the papers in Eleanor's office, my hands shaking slightly as I realized I was now responsible for more money than I'd ever imagined. Within 6 months, I'd leased a 5,000-square-foot warehouse on the outskirts of town, hired 2 part-time employees, and established contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. Phoenix Plant Recovery, because everything deserves a second chance, was officially born. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had thrown me away assuming I was worthless. Now I was building a business empire based on proving that nothing is ever truly worthless if you know how to see its potential. By year 5, Phoenix Plant Recovery had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. We were operating in 12 states, had 47 licensed operators, and I'd just signed a consulting contract with Home Depot's regional headquarters. The scared, broken woman who'd been thrown out with the trash was now being flown to corporate meetings in Atlanta. "Mrs. Williams, your success story is exactly what our industry needs to hear," said David Chen, Home Depot's sustainability director, as we toured their flagship store. "Turning waste into profit while helping the environment, that's the future of retail." I smiled politely, still getting used to being treated like an expert instead of an inconvenience. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been plenty of 18-hour days, failed experiments, and moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But every challenge had taught me something new about business, about myself, and about what I was truly capable of. My personal life had stabilized too. I'd moved into a nice 2-bedroom apartment in Millbrook's historic district, complete with a garden where I could test new rehabilitation techniques. I'd made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. My weekly book club with Eleanor and 3 other women had become the highlight of my social calendar. The financial success was staggering even to me. Phoenix Plant Recovery was generating over $2 million in annual revenue, and my personal net worth had crossed the 7-figure mark. I kept detailed spreadsheets not because I was obsessed with money, but because the numbers represented something more important: independence. "Have you thought about expanding internationally?" asked Marcus Thompson, my business attorney, during our quarterly review. "We've been getting inquiries from Canada and the UK. One step at a time." I replied, though the idea was tempting. "I want to make sure we're doing this right before we get too ambitious." The truth was, I was already thinking about the next phase. The plant rehabilitation business had taught me that there were profitable opportunities hiding in plain sight all around us if you knew how to look for them. I'd started investing in other small businesses, applying the same principle of finding undervalued potential and helping it grow. But the real satisfaction came from the personal victories, like the day I hired Tommy Martinez, a 19-year-old who'd been written off by everyone else, but had an incredible intuition for plant care. Or when Sarah Mitchell, who'd taken that first chance on me, sold her garden center and became one of my licensed operators in Florida. "You've changed my whole perspective on what's possible," Sarah told me during her retirement party. "Watching you build this from nothing, it's inspired half the women in this town to take risks they never would have considered. Every contract signed, every new location opened, every success story was proof that their judgment had been spectacularly wrong. And honestly, I was just getting started." The house hunting began as a practical decision and ended as an act of pure, beautiful justice. After 5 years of apartment living, I needed more space for my expanding business ventures and investment portfolio. What I found instead was the perfect way to announce to Millbrook that Margaret Williams was no longer the woman anyone could throw away. The Harrison estate. Jennifer Walsh, my realtor, repeated when I mentioned the property. "Maggie, that house hasn't been on the market in 40 years. It's the most prestigious address in Millbrook Heights." Millbrook Heights, the neighborhood where James and Jessica had always dreamed of living but could never afford. The neighborhood they'd drive through on Sunday afternoons, fantasizing about someday, while living in their modest colonial with the mortgage they'd kicked me out to afford. "Is it for sale?" I asked simply. "Well, yes, but," Jennifer hesitated. "The asking price is $4.2 million. Let's take a look." The Harrison estate was everything I'd expected, and more. 12,000 square feet of pristine colonial architecture, sitting on 8 acres of manicured grounds, master suite with dual fireplaces, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a chef's kitchen that could feed a small army, and a conservatory that was basically a greenhouse attached to the house. But what really sold me was the view from the master bedroom window. You could see the entire town of Millbrook spread out below, including the modest neighborhood where James and Jessica lived. Every morning, I could wake up and literally look down on the people who'd looked down on me. "Cash offer?" I said without hesitation. $3.8 million. Close in 2 weeks. Jennifer nearly dropped her briefcase. "Maggie, are you sure that's a huge commitment?" I was more than sure. Phoenix Plant Recovery was throwing off enough profit to cover the mortgage payments easily, and my investment portfolio had grown to the point where I could afford the down payment without touching my business accounts. But more than that, I could afford it because I'd earned every penny through my own intelligence, determination, and hard work. The sellers accepted my offer within 6 hours. 2 weeks later, I stood in the grand foyer of my new home, holding the keys and trying not to laugh out loud at the absurdity of it all. 6 years earlier, I'd been sleeping in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Now I owned the most expensive house in the county. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Saw the real estate transfer in the paper. You magnificent woman. Champagne celebration this weekend. Nam si mios. Some you out." I smiled, typing back, "Bring the good stuff. We're toasting to new beginnings." What I didn't type but was thinking was that some beginnings require endings. And I had a feeling that the ending to my relationship with James and Jessica was about to become very, very interesting. The doorbell rang at 9:17 a.m. on a Saturday, exactly 24 hours after the real estate transfer hit the local paper. Through the security monitor, because yes, my house came with a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous, I saw them standing on my front porch like door-to-door salespeople. James looked older, grayer around the temples, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "Weekend dad trying too hard." Jessica stood beside him in designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my first month's rent at Yepes. Behind them were 2 teenagers I barely recognized. Emma, now 16, had inherited her mother's sharp features, but thankfully not her cruel eyes. Tony, 14, looked like a taller version of James at that age back when he used to build blanket forts and bring me dandelions from the yard. I took my time walking to the front door, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. 6 years of silence, and they show up the day after they discover I'm rich. The timing was so perfectly predictable, it was almost funny. Well, I said, opening the door but not the screen. "James, Jessica, children I barely know. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "Mom," James's voice cracked slightly. "We read about the house in the paper. We wanted to congratulate you." "How thoughtful. Congratulations delivered. Anything else?" Jessica stepped forward with that bright, fake smile I remembered so well. "Maggie, we know things ended badly between us. We've had time to reflect, and we realize we handled everything wrong 6 years ago." "Handled everything wrong," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Emma shifted uncomfortably behind her parents. "Grandma Maggie, I barely remember you, but Mom and Dad said you used to make amazing chocolate chip cookies." The girl's innocent comment hit harder than her parents' practiced apologies. She was right, she barely remembered me, because they'd stolen 6 years of her childhood from both of us. 6 years of birthdays, school, plays, bedtime stories, and grandmother-granddaughter moments that we'd never get back. "I did make good cookies," I said softly, looking at Emma. Then I turned back to her parents. "Before I was thrown out like garbage." "Mom, please," James pleaded. "Can we come in? Can we talk? Talk about what exactly—" Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "We're family, Maggie, and family should stick together, especially when—" She gestured vaguely at the mansion behind me. "When there's room for everyone." There it was, the real reason for their visit delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Room for everyone," I mused. "How convenient that you've discovered your family feelings now that I have 12,000 square feet. That's not fair." James protested, though his eyes were already cataloging what he could see of the house interior. "We've missed you. The kids have missed having a grandmother." I laughed, actually laughed at the absurdity of it. "James, honey, you threw me out of your house with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Jessica told me I was too set in my ways and that figuring out my life wasn't your problem anymore. Now you miss me. The silence stretched until Tony spoke up. "Dad, what is she talking about? Why don't you come in?" I said, finally stepping back from the door. "Since you're so interested in family reunions." I led them through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier and marble staircase, into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. I watched their faces as they took in the silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs, the artwork that cost more than most people's cars. "This place is incredible." Tony breathed, walking to the windows. "Mom, look at the pool." Jessica was looking all right. I could practically see her calculating square footage and property values. "It's certainly spacious," she said carefully, "much too big for one person. Is it—" I settled into my favorite armchair, a beautiful wingback in navy blue velvet. I find I quite like having space to breathe. What followed was exactly what I'd expected. The carefully rehearsed apologies, the casual mentions of their financial difficulties, the not-so-subtle hints about temporary living arrangements. They wanted to move in naturally, just until they got back on their feet. But the most interesting part came when I pulled out my phone and showed them what my friend Nancy Martinez at the unemployment office had told me. James hadn't lost his job 3 months ago. He'd been fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. Jessica had maxed out 3 new credit cards on designer clothes and spa treatments. They weren't just behind on their mortgage. They were facing foreclosure next month. I also know, I continued watching their faces carefully, that you drove by my motel every single day for 6 months after you threw me out. You knew exactly where I was living and exactly how much I was struggling, and you never once stopped to check if I was okay. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, is that true?" James couldn't look at his daughter, but Jessica had switched to full attack mode. "Fine. So we made mistakes. So did you. You could have asked for help instead of disappearing for 6 years. There's something else you should know," I said softly. "About 6 months after I moved out, your father came to see me." Jessica's head snapped toward James. "What?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to an old photo. I took a picture of the letter he wrote me that night. Would you like me to read it out loud? The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on legal pad paper. In it, James apologized profusely for letting Jessica convince him to throw me out. He admitted that he missed me desperately, that the house felt empty without me, that he realized he'd chosen his wife's convenience over his mother's well-being. But the most damning part was the last paragraph, where he begged me not to tell Jessica about his visit, because she's already threatened to leave me if I try to bring you back. "He chose you," I told Jessica calmly. "He chose keeping you happy over doing the right thing by his mother, and for 6 years he's been lying to all of you about it." The explosion that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Jessica's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely as she screamed at James about betrayal and lies. Emma and Tony sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the depth of their parents' deception. But when Jessica demanded to know how I could cut them out of my life, when she accused me of playing games and holding grudges, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "This woman," I said, standing up and smoothing down my silk blouse, "owns a multi-million-dollar business. This woman has friends who respect her employees, who depend on her, and investments that generate more income in a month than your father made in a year when he had a job." I walked to the window, looking out at my perfectly manicured grounds. This woman doesn't need anything from anyone, especially not from people who threw her away like garbage and now want to move into her house because they've mismanaged their own lives. "So you don't want a relationship with us?" Tony asked, his voice small. "Even now that you know we were lied to?" The question broke my heart, but I kept my expression neutral. "I want a relationship with you and Emma. You're innocent victims in this situation. But your parents—" I looked directly at James and Jessica. "Your parents are going to have to earn their way back into my life, if they can." Jessica stood up abruptly, her mask of false sweetness finally discarded completely. "This is ridiculous. We're your family, Maggie. You can't just pick and choose which parts of us you want." "Watch me." "Fine. You want to punish us for something that happened 6 years ago? We'll just leave. Come on, James. Kids, we don't need this." But Emma didn't move. Neither did Tony. "Actually," Emma said quietly, "I want to stay and talk to Grandma Maggie alone." "Emma, we're leaving," Jessica commanded. "No." Emma's voice was stronger now. "I'm 16 years old, and I just found out you've been lying to me for 6 years about my grandmother. I want to hear her side of the story." "Me too," Tony nodded. After James and Jessica left with threats to return and demands for access, I sat with Emma and Tony for 2 hours. I answered their questions, showed them photo albums from their father's childhood, and listened to their stories about school friends and dreams for the future. They were good kids despite their parents' failures, and I could see echoes of the little boy I'd raised in both of them. "Can we come back next weekend?" Emma asked as I walked them to the door. "Anytime you want," I promised. "I have 6 years of grandmothering to catch up on." As I watched their car disappear down my long driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete satisfaction. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The people who'd thrown me away were now the ones begging for scraps, while the woman they'd discarded was living in luxury they could never afford. I'd proven that being thrown away doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes it just means you're finally free to discover your true value. The next morning, I called Eleanor to tell her about the visit. "How do you feel?" she asked after I'd shared the whole story. I looked out at my beautiful grounds, sipped my coffee from expensive china, and smiled. "I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." Finally. Some victories are quiet. This one was perfect. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.